seen those massive volcanoes in Iceland recently, spewing orange and red glowing lava on the news or in your social media feed? They caused thousands of people to be evacuated. They even closed an entire town nearby. One might say those volcanoes reflect the massive amount of energy below our feet in the Earth's core. Iceland is harnessing that massive energy called geothermal energy, as are other places, including some states in the US. How much of a difference can geothermal really make in our collective quest to transition to a net zero emissions economy? Today, we're going to find out from a master of all things geothermal who runs a global geothermal organization. So put on your earbuds, turn up the volume, and prepare to take notes too, because our discussion might help you discover how you might use geothermal energy as well. Welcome to Electric Ladies Podcast. We share stories, insights, tips, and advice from remarkably innovative women working on the front lines of corporate responsibility, energy, sustainability, climate, and ESG related issues. I'm your host, Joan Michelson. We talk about innovation, leadership, technologies, and careers, always bringing a new perspective. Find us anywhere you like to listen to podcasts on our website, electricladiespodcast.com, and through my Forbes blog as well. And please pass it on to your friends and leave us a 5-star review if you're so inclined. It helps other people find us. If you are at an inflection point yourself, looking for support with your ESG work or your career, please reach out to me. In all the chaos swirling around us, there's a lot of opportunity, and we don't want you to miss out or be flailing. You can reach out to me on Twitter at Joan Michelson or LinkedIn and let me know, no matter what industry you're in. This episode is brought to you by Competent Boards, a comprehensive training program for board members and aspiring board members. I'm faculty, to be honest, and I also just did the sustainability and ESG designation certification myself, so I know from whence I speak. The truth is, the group is truly global, a powerful group of individuals, and it gives you the skills, strategic perspective, and confidence you'll need in today's boardrooms, especially around the kinds of issues we talk about on Electric Ladies Podcast. And you can find them on competentboards.com. Just last week, the Biden-Harris administration announced investing $31 million in 6 renewable geothermal energy projects. They're in South Carolina, Texas, New Mexico, and California. But what is geothermal? How does it work? Where can we get it? Those are some of the questions we'll get answered today. I had the privilege of going to Iceland again recently to attend the International Geothermal Conference and explore the Iceland energy ecosystem. So let's find out from an expert how we can harness this immense source of energy below our feet to help us transition to a clean energy economy. I'd like you to meet Dr. Marit Brommer. She is CEO of the International Geothermal Association and a geologist and expert in geothermal energy. Prior to joining the IGA, Marit was an exploration and production technologist at Shell Oil Company. Yes, an oil and gas company. Technology is very similar. And before that, she was at Total Energy in the same kind of role. And before that, she spent many years at a large engineering firm in the Netherlands. She studied geology at the Free University in Amsterdam and earned her PhD in applied geology and geophysics from Delft University of Technology in the Netherlands. She writes and speaks on these issues a great deal. I had this distinct pleasure of meeting Marit when I was in Iceland a few weeks ago and hearing her speak at the conference, and I knew I wanted you to meet her too. In fact, the first time I met her, I said, I need to have you on my show. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Dr. Marit Brommer to Electric Ladies Podcast. Thank you, Marit, and thank you for joining us from the Netherlands, no less.
Well, thanks, Jo, and thanks for having me. And it's such a pleasure to be on your podcast. And I love the title, Electric Ladies. I think that's phenomenal.
Oh, thank you so much. Appreciate it. So tell us about the International Geothermal Association so people have a sense of in effect, what your day job is, right? To connect any, and also feel free to correct anything I got wrong in the introduction.
Well, not so much wrong. So let me first explain indeed IGA. So IGA is the International Geothermal Association. We are a global association of countries and companies coming together and associating themselves towards furthering and advancing the goal of getting more geothermal done in the world. And we do that through, let's say, understanding where the right policy sits and advocating for even better policies, or maybe for those countries who are emerging, help them, guide them, and advise them on setting the right policies in order to enable the industry, for whom we are also, of course, representing their best interest, to come in and do the job. So in effect, the association sees two type of, let's say, membership. One is the countries, and hence we have a very good eye on the ground and boots on the ground, so to speak, in terms of where it's happening and who is doing what. And we get a lot of information, predominantly data, but also context and a network and, let's say, the understanding of how geothermal energy is happening on that specific jurisdiction or country or project level. And at the same time, I mean, the majority of the companies and the corporates, but even the consultants who are joining us, they're interested, of course, in seeing more geothermal happening. And hence our bigger goal is to see geothermal everywhere and anywhere. And at the moment, we have a stake in about 88 countries where we see geothermal happening. But of course, the overall goal is to see geothermal on all the beautiful countries that we have on our planet.
Thank you for that. So, to be clear, your members are both companies and, well, any kind of entity, right? So they're nonprofits, they're
Yes.
companies, are they government agencies that are members also?
Yeah, they can be partners. We solicit, let's say, membership more from the ones who have either a commercial stake in geothermal, or who have a policy stake, as in the countries who are most of the time they are a country association, an affiliated member, as we call them. So, for instance, in the USA, where we have a sister association called Geothermal Rising, which really is after seeking the best interest, of course, of their American-based best interest, both for the companies and the individuals and the students. I mean, everyone basically who has an interest in geothermal energy. And hence they become a member of the IGA, because our role is not to look after just one country. Our role is really to look globally after the best interest of geothermal energy. And I think this is a little bridge towards what geothermal energy is actually, what it is, right? Because I don't think that many of, let's say, the non-geothermal experts actually know what geothermal energy is. And I really appreciate that you refer to Iceland, and we met, of course, in Iceland, and the volcanoes is, of course, a super important element of our geological geothermal background. But very simple, the earth contains heat, and we need to drill for that heat. And drilling is very similar to the oil and gas industry. But we don't do, let's say, oil and gas production. We do heat production, and it can come in the form of steam or warm water. And we use that to generate electricity through turbines, very similar to how coal assets work. But we just use the heat that is naturally contained in the reservoir rocks. And hence we're clean and we're green and we're, well, definitely less emissions than coal or oil. But equally, we don't need volcanoes. We don't necessarily need volcanoes to utilize geothermal energy, because in my country, for instance, Joan, I am speaking now here indeed in The Hague, where there are some geothermal projects. And they're sourcing greenhouses with heat that is kept, let's say, 3 kilometers, if you drill down 3 kilometers, and they're sourcing that heat towards the greenhouses to grow tomatoes. And I am sure, pretty sure, I don't live on a volcano. I live on a sedimentary basin, and hence, really, geothermal can be utilized everywhere on this planet.
Well, that's so interesting, and I'm so glad you explained it that way. So the way that I've understood it is, in effect, that geothermal, as you said, can be anywhere and everywhere, because it's at the core of the earth. It's just a question of how far down you drill, right? And that's why oil and gas excavation and exploration skills are, the similar skills, because you're drilling, right? Instead of drilling for oil, you're drilling for, what are you actually drilling for? Are you drilling for steam? Are you drilling for water? What you said, you're drilling for heat, but
Yeah.
how do you capture it?
Yeah, this is such a good question because ultimately, what is geothermal energy, right? Also, from a legal point of view, it's super interesting. But let me first explain from a technical point of view. So, everywhere on this planet, every kilometer that you go down in the drill, let's say bits, you will find an increase in the temperature. And I speak here in Celsius. I am so sorry, but I'm used to
That's okay.
kilometers
Okay.
of Celsius. That's my metric system. So every kilometer depth, you're increasing the temperature with 30 degrees, right? And hence, on average, on our planet, wherever you are, you will find approximately a 3 to 4 kilometers depth. You will find 90 to 100 degrees, 120 degrees even Celsius temperatures, water, and the rocks. Now, there are certain places, and we've met in Iceland. Now, Iceland is an exception, like Western US in California, like the African Rift System in Kenya and Tanzania, like New Zealand, the Northern Island of New Zealand, like Indonesia and the Philippines. They are all exceptional places because this is where the volcanoes are. And the volcanoes are where the tectonic plates are meeting. And hence, you will find in much shallower depths a lot of heat contained. And hence, you don't need to drill down 3 kilometers, as in, let's say, my place, but you only need to drill a kilometer or 1,500 meters to find extraordinary temperatures like 250 or 300 degrees Celsius. And that's steam. So if you look at my country, as in the Netherlands, you would drill down 3 kilometers and you will get hot water, right? You will get a hot environment where you could boil an egg. Because in 100 degrees, you could boil an egg, right? You could boil an egg for 5 minutes and you have a nicely soft boiled egg. In Iceland, however, it takes only 1 minute at 1,500 meter depth and you would have a steamy boiled egg, meaning that you would need to go much shallower to get much more temperature. And let's say the physics of this just tells you that a body of rock that is about 250 degrees Celsius, any water or any water vapor that is contained in that would be just steam. You would not see that boiling egg. You would see a steam, let's say, foggy atmosphere, right? And hence, the difference is that with that steam, we generate electricity. And with the hot water, we heat up greenhouses and district heating systems for the houses.
Perfect. Thank you. So how does it get, it's interesting to me because, we think of steam as ethereal, right? It's not, most people don't think they can feel it as wet on their hands, but they don't see how you can hold on to it, right? So how do you capture that and then get it to the grid? How does
Yeah.
that happen?
Yes. Isn't that phenomenal? I mean, we all understand that, in the early days when we invented, let's say with hard coal, we invented this steam machine in order to drive the train, for instance, or these ships. It all went on a turbine, right? It's a turbine that is being driven by the steam. And hence it is let's say, a circular generator that by its movement creates energy, and hence we call it electricity these days because we need electricity to put on the grid. So a wind turbine, everyone gets it because they see the wind moving the propellers, right? It goes round and round and round. It generates a circle. And hence that's a similar, let's say, effect that we have as geothermal. We pump up basically the steam, but we just don't need coal and we don't need wind. What we need is to go down where the steam sits or where the hot water sits, and we get it at surface, which circulates the turbine, and that turbine creates that sort of electrical vent, and it goes on the grid. And in a way, it sounds magic that you're using the natural sort of heat or the natural steam that is contained. Well, steam is contained in particular places. Heat is contained almost everywhere. And hence it is a fascinating thing to me that, once at service, it's very similar. It's just thermodynamics, right? Whether you have coal or whether you have wind or whether we have a hydropower dam, for instance, it all works on the same mechanism. But for us as geothermal, we need to drill. We need to go down in that sort of heat beneath our feet type of mechanism. But once at service, it's just as simple as another turbine.
Oh, that's so interesting. So, in your presentation at the International Geothermal Conference, you described countries that have geothermal energy, and you just mentioned a few. By the way, I've been to Tanzania.
Oh,
There's
nice.
beautiful people
Yeah.
and great culture, and amazing animals. The I mentioned in the introduction that there are six new projects that
Yeah.
the U.S. government is funding: Texas, New Mexico, South Carolina, and California. So talk about where geothermal, I mean, you said that it doesn't depend on volcanoes, obviously, but that it's easier to get to in places that have volcanoes because it's shallower. You don't have to drill as far. But where in the US do you find that geothermal is most plentiful and accessible, and why?
So, to be fair, the US, when it comes down to, let's say, power, electricity, the US is number one when it comes down to what we call, in these technical terms, the installed capacity. For geothermal electricity, somewhere around 3.2 gigawatts electric is installed in the US alone. We have, just side note, we have around 16.5 to be exact, gigawatts electric around the globe, and the US takes 3.2, 3.3 of that. But the majority of that installed capacity for electricity sits in Nevada, sits in California, sits really in that western end of your beautiful, beautiful continent. And the reason for that is because that's where let's say, your tectonic activity is highest. It's where the tectonic plates are either boundaries or is subsiding, as we call it. You have, of course, for humans, detrimental, but you have some significant earthquakes, of course, in California. But for us as geologists, and especially for geothermal people, these kind of plate boundaries are actually the most exciting points because they offer the thermal conditions where you can, be most shallow when it comes down to drilling, yielding the most beneficial, let's say, wells that can drive those turbines, and hence where you will find the majority of currently of the installed capacities, and hence your power assets is all in California, Nevada, and that sort of western boundary. Now, what is exciting about the DOE, and hence the Department of Energy, and hence your current Biden-Harris administration, is that it wants to unlock geothermal anywhere. And with that, it has put a golden notion on that geothermal can be unlocked anywhere through different type of innovation and technology. Because let's be very clear, to unlock geothermal in the volcanic areas, it takes a specific technology. Fine, super, very nice. But that specific plate boundary conditions are not everywhere. So it has been a little bit locked in terms of being a geological constraint technology. And what I find super exciting about what's happening, and I think hopefully one day this is a global trend, and I really commend, let's say, the US administration on this, is to look at different type of technologies and hence innovation in order to unlock geothermal anywhere. And think about this as, let's say, look at different type of rocks to unlock the heat, or think about different type of drilling technology in order to make the most of that heat proposition beneath our feet. And hence, this requires innovation, it requires research and development, it requires time to invest in that innovation. And I think the US has really put a lot of money and hence skin in the game to develop this kind of technology plays. And I think that is super exciting.
I appreciate that. And one of the things you said that's kind of intriguing, I just want to clarify, is it that um, where the tectonic activity is, or where volcanoes are for that matter, but it's easier to get at. You don't have to drill as far. Is that a matter of making it more commercially accessible so they don't, it's not as expensive to access? Or is that something that makes the quality of the geothermal different? Like, is there a difference in the quality whether you drill down further, or if it's closer to the surface, or is it just a matter of how much it costs? Not to
Well,
diminish the cost, because that
no, no,
matters.
no. This is a wonderful question. And I think, as always, it's a combination of both. Because if I look from a technical point of view, like, let's say the best resources in geothermal energy are the ones with, let's say, the hottest temperature, which is also why, from a framing point of view, geothermal is hot. Yes, we like it hot, right? The hotter, the better. And hence, and it's not because we're hot rock lovers or anything. It's just that once you have a hot resource, a really hot resource, like Iceland or like the geysers in California, and when you have resources that are beyond, and again, I go in my Celsius, 250 degrees, your power plant, your turbines work smoothly. They work very efficiently because the pressure and, let's say, the capacity factors of our power plants are superb, right? We have a capacity factor of between 80 and 90%. Solar and wind beat that, right? They can't beat that. They are intermittent, and we're not. But the thing is, to drive a turbine with heat, you need to have consistency and you need to have hot temperatures, preferably steam. And hence, the best resources are found in the hottest areas. And the hottest areas are exactly indeed in those plate boundaries, whether it's an extension or whether it's a collision or a subsiding zone. That's where the hottest area sits. California, Indonesia, Philippines, Kenya as a strong extension zone, Turkey, Italy, those are the zones where electricity is produced beautifully. Now, the Biden-Harris administration, Texas, for instance, Texas, I'm pretty sure it doesn't have a volcano, right? It's not on a plate boundary. What they're doing there is looking at what we would call mid to low temperature resources. And hence, it requires you to drill deeper. Hence, it becomes indeed, from a commercial perspective, a more daunting game. And hence, your technology and your drilling efforts need to be really streamlined and need to be, eyes on the ball, laser sharp focus, and it needs to be fit for purpose. And whether you do electricity or direct utilization of that heat, it doesn't matter. Both of them are just borderlining commerciality. And I guess this is where, let's say, the R&D perspective comes in. How to streamline the process requires someone to invest in that process. And not every country is doing that. And hence, again, just to commend the Biden-Harris administration here, this is just phenomenal.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I want to pull out something that we've kind of talked over without expressing directly, and that is, and you touched on it, which is that geothermal is a baseload power, and that's the magic of it. That's a lot of the magic of it, is that it can, as you say, wind and solar are intermittent, but geothermal is not. It can provide that consistency that renewable energy needs. You mentioned that the IGA focuses a lot on policies that are effective. The Inflation Reduction Act in the US gives homeowners an opportunity to get a 30% tax credit for installing geothermal heat pumps, for example. And there's other funding. In fact, there's $31 million, I think, comes from that pool of funds as well. But which policies have you found in this work are most effective in increasing geothermal and proliferating it, and maybe expediting the proliferation of geothermal?
Yeah, superb. And just maybe to reiterate, indeed, I love that you bring in the homeowners and the heat pumps, the geothermal heat pumps, because in a way it's all united, and on the other hand, it's not. When I talk about deep drills and when I talk about, let's say, accessing that steam field, that's big, right? We're talking here about 10, 20, 30 megawatt complex systems. And the homeowner is interested in maybe a couple of kilowatts, that he or she needs to do on a daily basis in order to run his or her household. And hence the geothermal element here, the heat pump element, is equally super important, because that's an application that can be used almost everywhere on this planet as well. And it doesn't require you to drill as deep as we do. And I say we because, and here I want to use my disclaimer, our association is more or less looking after deep geothermal, deep drills, and really looking after the big plays, district heating, electricity, and so on. And the homeowners, they are very interested in understanding how the ground source heat pumps or geothermal heat pumps can help make their households wean off gas or wean off fossil fuels in general, or to become independent or net zero. And they're super efficient, and they have a wonderful, let's say, ability to do that, but they're not necessarily part of our IGA membership. To be very straight and to be very fair, I love them. They're super important, but they're not necessarily here, I guess, for us to sort of talk about. Look, policies that work. Policies that work is predominantly centered around a couple of things. One is, in the broader scheme of things, incentives and subsidies around feed-in tariffs, whether we're talking about heat or whether we're talking about electricity. Feed-in tariffs in order to boost the business case for the project developer are super important. And they come in a variety of forms. They come in tax breaks. They come in, let's say, tax, let's call it tax breaks in general. They come in with a certain incentive towards the PPA, the power purchase agreement, or the heat purchase agreement. They come in various forms when it comes down to boosting the general business case for geothermal. Equally important policies around understanding that geothermal is a patient capital that can only be unlocked after a certain period of time. We have, by the way, Joan, we have a double-digit return, but you have to have patience. And what we see is that private equity, and especially the VCs, not necessarily have patience, meaning that our biggest burden is the fact that, not every country on this planet is keen to do PPPs, as in public-private partnerships. So they lean in a lot on the public side because they're public utilities or they're public funders or public lenders. But the private sector is super important, and they can bring in equity, but they also want to have a stable investment climate. And when the government is not supportive, neither with incentives or whatever kind of, let's say, enabling environment, there is no private entity that's going to invest its equity in geothermal, because it's a risky business for the first well. After the first well is drilled, there's no risk, right? Everyone wants to come in when that first well was drilled. So our biggest burden is basically getting the first well, getting through that exploration stage, prove the resource, and then just go and come to finance close. And I guess what is so wonderful about, currently the US, but I see that in many other countries as well, is the government stepping in to overcome the biggest hurdle, and that is drilling those wells.
To reduce the financial risk and the technical risk so that private capital can step in.
Yeah.
One of the interesting things that I noticed in preparing to talk to you today is the connection between geothermal and lithium production, that there's been accessing the opportunity to access lithium from geothermal brines. When I was in Iceland and we toured the couple of geothermal facilities, we saw big vats of brine, and I saw that brine being used for different things. But I didn't realize that it also was a resource for lithium. Now, obviously, we all know that lithium is a big commodity these days, and we need it for everything in this transition. Although I confess I don't worship at the temple of lithium ion batteries necessarily. I think there's a lot of other technologies, but
Yeah, true.
nonetheless, we do need lithium and we
Yeah.
need to have it more accessible so that we're not dependent upon countries that we don't want to do business with, right? Because right now we have to get a lot of it from Russia and areas that are at risk in Ukraine. So talk about the connection between geothermal and lithium. Is that am I right on that? That we can get geothermal, we can get lithium from geothermal brine? How does that work?
Yeah, no, you're spot on, and indeed, it becomes a very interesting value proposition for the geothermal sector as a whole, and it may not be everywhere in the same quantities in terms of we would call in when we speak about lithium, we would call more concentration in the geothermal brines. But it is true, Joan, that this is becoming a very interesting proposition for the geothermal sector as a whole to look at the content and the composition of the geothermal brine. So lithium is either mined, and that is only in a few, let's say, direct places such as Chile and in Australia, or it is, let's say, contained in carbonate rocks or in saline, let's say, lagoons where it is being dried, the solar is drying, let's say the solar content in that sort of salt water, and hence it becomes excavated, and hence it can be refined and processed. So that's number two. And then there's number three. All of a sudden, geothermal is here to propose, let's say, the third way of producing lithium. Now, lithium is not a free element, right? It is always contained within, let's say, another type of rock or with another mineral or with another element. And hence, not in every geothermal well draining or, let's say, produced from a specific type of reservoir rock contains the same, let's say, amount or concentration, as we call it, lithium. So it's not necessarily so that every well that we have drilled in geothermal across the globe will contain the same concentration of lithium. But there are places where it seems to be extremely interesting to at least look into how we can do, let's say, direct lithium extraction. This is what it's called these days, so DLE, from the geothermal brines. Now, there are three places at the moment where let's say, not just look, but really go into commercial scale. One is in your beautiful country, Salton Sea, Western California. This is where the concentration of lithium in, let's say, the geothermal plants are super interestingly high. UK, Cornwall, beautiful place, Cornish lithium, really looking into getting from the granite. So this is a granite basement where geothermal is used to drive some turbines for electricity production. And hence, as a byproduct, it delivers at the moment an interesting business case for lithium. And the border between France and Germany, it's called, let's say, a graben. It's like the rift. We have the African rift and we have the Rhine rift. And in that rifting system, there is also some super interesting, let's say, reservoir rock that seems to contain high concentrations of lithium that can be processed out of the brine. Now, I bet, and this is, let's say, my sort of narrative here, I bet, because we are undersampled, let's say, we only know of these three particular places, but I bet if we really sample, let's say, more wells and more projects, we will find that we have much more lithium, let's say, as a byproduct in certain other places as well. But at the moment, not every operator, not every developer is understanding and or appreciative, or from a policy point of view or a regulator point of view, I should actually say, allowed to understand its brine component. And hence, I am convinced that from a statistical point of view, we're undersampled and we're underutilizing this proposition. But yes, to the point of lithium, super interesting. And watch this space because I think it's going to be big.
Well, that's so interesting. So, just to piggyback on that, I kind of tie these last two questions together. Are there policies that I'm surprised that it's not only blocked a certain amount from what you said, but not encouraged? Are there policies that can be put in place to encourage that? Because I would think that any country would want to maximize their opportunity to have domestic lithium.
Yes and no. I think, look, without becoming too strong on the point of policies and regulators and how they operate and how they administrate, I think the world is such that once you fall into a certain category, and let's say in certain countries, geothermal is seen as a water management business, you cannot all of a sudden become a mining business, meaning that when you mine, because lithium is a commodity, it is a to be mined extraction of a geothermal brine, right? And hence, how do you regulate that? One, when you have a license that says, yes, you can extract hot water from this piece of land. And hence it becomes a legal battlefield sometimes to appreciate, between royalties and between commodities, what is it that we're dealing with? Similarly, in many mining law countries, as in what I typically see happening, geothermal in mining law countries fall under the mining law, right? They don't fall under the water law, they fall under the mining law. But they fall under the mining law not to produce a commodity, they fall under the mining law to produce energy, to serve the direct purpose of producing electrons to the grid or molecules to a district heating network or to the greenhouse, not necessarily to mine an extra commodity out of it. So again, you need to build in a special purpose here that requires sometimes the regulators to either say yes or no to your specific extension or addition to the license. And it's not per se a stopper, but from an administration point of view, I do think we need to massage.
Yes, no, I understand that. It can be confusing, the regulators, because it's really kind of it's even two regulatory bodies, I think,
Oh,
as well,
yeah.
maybe more than two.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
But I just think that using the byproduct in that way, I mean, if that's like a gift from an extra present
Yeah.
from the geothermal. So I
Yes.
want to ask you one other thing and then get some career advice from you. You mentioned the issue of earthquakes, and
Yeah.
for example, there was a earthquake in South Korea a few years ago that was believed to be triggered by geothermal. Fracking is believed to trigger an increase in earthquakes. Obviously, geothermal involves drilling. I understand what you're saying about seismic activity can make geothermal more accessible, but is it the other way around? Does drilling for geothermal actually trigger earthquakes?
Oh, I love this question. And without becoming too technical on this, if you would ask me with my oil and gas background, I would have said immediately, look, we have to be extremely careful because what we're doing is extracting, let's say, a fluid, and we're not re-injecting that fluid, right? We're taking something out of the reservoir rock, whether it's 3 or 4 or 5 kilometers depth, and we're taking it out of that rock and we're not doing anything with it. We're just keeping that under balance or under pressured or over pressured for that matter. And basically, we're not as, let's say, as elegant as the geothermal business, because the geothermal business, let's say in 99% of the cases where we do geothermal, we produce the fluids and we re-inject the fluids as well. Meaning that, think of it as I cycle a lot, right? I really like my bike, but sometimes my tires, they get a little bit flat, right? And I need to pump it up, right? But think of it, that's oil and gas, right? Because you get a flat tire in oil and gas and you really need to work hard to make it, keep it stable, your tires. But in geothermal, I don't need to pump up my tires because it's a circle. There is no geothermal asset at the moment that needs constantly being pumped up again or flat tires because we are a circle. We produce, we re-inject. We produce, we re-inject. So in that sense, the pressure regime in our reservoir rock is actually quite stable. And earthquakes or seismic, let's say, incidents that happen around oil and gas extractions happen because there is a sudden release of the pressure. But we don't do that in geothermal. Now, coming to Pohang, so coming to South Korea and coming to certain places where let's say there has been seismic incidences, if I may say so, and I say this very black and white, and I don't mean to discredit the developers or the scientists, because in South Korea it was a scientist project. In France, where I'm referring to right now, it was a developer. But both of those occasions were mismanaged and were not utilizing the best practices and hence the best guidance in terms of how to deal with that specific type of rock. Meaning that if you have a fractured rock, and if you're using your injection well in the wrong way, as in, not injecting in the right type of reservoir or the right type of pressure back into, let's say, the rock, you can count on your own hands that it will cause some troubles. So, not to discredit, and yes, I think we all need to be extremely careful when we're dealing with the subsurface. But this is why we have guidelines. This is why we have best practices. This is why we are trained. This is why we are taking utmost care of, let's say, reservoir management. And those who do not follow the rules will see the consequences. And hence, that is super bad because it has a negative imprint on us as a geothermal sector. But I dare to say that we can prevent all of that if you follow the right guidelines.
Yeah, when things are done well, it makes a difference, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
Well, the qualifications for doing this work, it's a bit of threading a needle, and you need to,
Yes.
do it carefully. So before I let you get back to your life, I like to get career advice for mid-career women. And I'm thinking of a woman who has at least 10, maybe 15 years of experience. She's educated. She knows what she's good at. She wants to excel. She's ambitious. She wants to make money. And she wants to make a difference and doesn't believe that there needs to be a trade-off. So, what advice would you give to her?
Can it also be a couple of advices? Because I am so eager
Lovely. You can give me as many as you want.
All right. Okay. So first and foremost, it's about getting your voice heard and claiming your seat at that table and understanding that you don't take no for an answer. And I guess a lot of this sort of career progression happens, and also, let's say, the frustration happens in that mid-management, right? It's when you do not get the job, or when you do not get a promotion, or when you feel you have to go home because you have to take care of whatever it is in your home situation. And I just want to say, let that go. Just go. Just do it. Let's sometimes, claim your seat at that conference room, or speak up at that plenary meeting, or say to your whatever line manager, you're going to give me that next promotion because I owe it. You owe it to me, but I earned it. I am the one who takes upon. Anyway, you get my point. So don't be shy, claim your spot and do it.
Love that. I love that. And I think that what goes along with that is when you say don't take no for an answer, that means to me, when you get no, sometimes it means not now. Sometimes it means try somebody else. In essence, what I'm hearing you say is don't stop just
Don't
because you
stop.
get a no or
Because what is
don't
the
get it.
no? What is the no? Really? Is indeed it, and do I hear the no? Or do I actually want to hear the no, right? And I feel that, look, I find it fascinating, this whole thing. I mean, I am now 25 years, not just in the energy business, but I'm 25 years after my graduation, right? And I go back to university. I sometimes I'm asked to go, and I hear the same type of questions from especially female students, right? How did you handle this? How did you do that? And I think, oh my God, Joan, this is 5 years later. And apparently this is the same type of, conversations we're having. And ultimately, in my life, no man has ever asked me, how do I land my next job? How do I get to the next career point? How do I do this? But women do. And it tells me that we're super bad at that. Apparently, telling our girls, telling our daughters, telling our sisters, telling our mothers that we can do this, right? We're We're capable. We're super smart. We get the right notes. It's not about being capable, right? It's about getting there and getting the job done. And don't listen to no, you just go.
Right. And find the place. Absolutely. I love that. And take the risk. I mean, when I think I told you when we met, but I got into this space when I was recruited by Chrysler to head of communications and co-head sales and marketing of their electric car division. I'd never worked in the car business. If they had posted an ad and I applied, they'd never know my name because I would have been scanned out by the applicant tracking system. And they were in Fargo, North Dakota, and I was here in Washington, D.C. So it's like, wait a minute, and my friends thought I was completely nuts,
Yeah,
but I said, why not? And it changed my life, right?
yeah,
So that's
yeah,
the other side is go for it. And then
yeah,
when it might show up looking differently than you expected,
yeah,
and that, you still have to say yes to that because it's not in the
yeah.
form you were anticipating, that's just a different form.
But this is it, right? And I guess the and it takes a unique character to jump immediately. I get that, right? We're not all the same. I get that. But at the same time, it doesn't need as bold as what you're just describing, right? It can also be just ask for that raise, negotiate about the contracts, say no sometimes as well when they ask you to stay late and you say why? Why should I stay late? Exactly. And I guess the point of us women is ultimately I think we're raised as being always nice, and I like that because I also like to be nice. I mean, there's nothing wrong to be nice, but I guess in business and in professional and in your professional life, it's super important to stand up, to know your worth, and to not shy away from that, and to claim your seats, and to prepare, and to network. And if there is a meeting scheduled the next day, you do a pre-meeting, right, Joan? You do a pre-meeting. You do not go in a meeting room without being prepared. You do not throw yourself out there on your own. You find your allies, you find your friends, you find the ones who can also speak on your behalf when you are not been given the microphone. And I guess all these small little tactics is apparently what boys learn from a very young age. And apparently us girls, we seem to learn on a very late stage in life or never, right? And that's what I would like to say to the girls. Own your space. You're worth it.
Definitely. Go for it. Yeah,
Go for
absolutely.
it. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for your time today, Marie. Any final thoughts before I let you get back to your life?
Well, first of all, electric ladies, wonderful. I just can't over the whole sound of it is amazing. But maybe my final thoughts, because also for let's say the conversation on energy, let's not forget the following: is that yes, we need electricity. Yes, because I also want my computer to run and my iPhone and whatever. But I also want to live comfortable, right? My house, it needs to be in a nice temperature, and that is called heating and cooling. And we don't need electricity only for that. We need a direct resource for that, and that's geothermal. Meaning that I'm not pushing here on a geothermal, but ultimately, when we think about what makes a sustainable life and what makes sustainable living, it is not just about electricity. Energy is more than electricity, and hence us here collectively advocating for sustainability and for advocating for net zero, let's not forget heating and cooling of our houses, of our homes, of our businesses, and of our industry.
I love that. Yes, there's different types of energy that can be used for different uses. Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining me today on Electric Ladies Podcast, Dr. Marit Brommer of the International Geothermal Association. You're a star, my friend. I really appreciate you making the time and the work you do to help save the planet. So thank you so much. So, what did Money say that resonated with you? Do you want to explore how you can use more geothermal energy in your home or business? Post it to us on Twitter and Threads at Joan Michelson. Send us any questions there as well. You may win a complimentary 30-minute coaching session with me. And please subscribe to our mailing list to stay abreast of our amazing guests like Marit, our articles, and career advice. And you can subscribe on electricladiespodcast.com. I'm Joan Michelson. Thank you for joining us. See you next time.